Alright, so in today's tutorial we are going to be looking at some super sexy text animations, and there are a few things that I love more than text animations. Now these can't only be used for text, you can use them on shapes, icons, you could even do it on real world footage for some of these. I just think that text is a great way to exemplify how you can use them. But before we get into the tutorial itself, I just want to say a quick thank you to Artlist, who is sponsoring this video, but more on them later on. Now with that being said, we can hop straight into After Effects, where I have 5 different compositions set up, all at 1920 by 1080 at 24 frames per second. This first one is going to be a morph text animation, and we're just going to start out using our text tool, and I'm just going to type out a simple word here, and we just want to make sure that we get a good sense of all the letters so we can better see the morph that we are going to be doing. And let's pick a nice little font here, maybe something like this, nice, blocky, thick. And you can even do something pretty cool with this, like maybe taking these and morphing them into shapes, or from shapes into the letters. And actually, let's maybe do this. And to do that, I'm just going to select my rectangle tool up here. I'm going to remove the stroke because we just want this to be a full shape. We can either create just the same size shape for everything, or just make sure that we get all these letters covered up pretty good. So I think that's what we're going to do here. Maybe something like that, and maybe just duplicate this a couple of times. And I want to make sure that when I duplicate it, I don't duplicate it in the same layer, just because then we have a little bit more control of what we're going to be doing here. And we can select all our layers, go into the align tool, which you can find if you go to window and then align, and we want to make sure selection is selected. And I'm just going to space them out evenly so that, you know, there's even amount of spacing in between each of these. So from here we can add just a little bit of animation to this, and you know, this isn't necessary for the morph itself, but it's going to make it look cool. So I'm just going to keyframe that at 1 second, go to 12 frames, and I'm just going to move these around a little bit to get a little bit of like almost like a geometric type of movement here that I think might look pretty cool. And go back to 0 and move these around a little bit more. And I'm just trying to get some pretty sharp angles here for this look. And you can see the curve is bending a little bit, which is completely fine. We'll change that in just a second. So you can select all your keyframes, right click the keyframes, go to keyframe interpolation, and where you see the spatial interpolation, you just want to change that to linear, and then that'll make it nice and even. So now we can select the keyframes again, and you can ease them however you want. In this case, I'm just going to use something like sexy speed, because why not? So now we should get a little animation where they all come in, and we can play around with the timing of it a little bit. So like this one, for example, I want it to come in before this one. So I'm just going to move this forward a little bit, and maybe one other one, move it forward a little bit, just so we get a slight bit of offset in all these shapes. So they come in, and we get this nice little animation where they kind of Tetris-y. And now we can get to the morph itself, and the way we're going to do that is I'm going to reshow my text layer, which is going to be behind here, and we can just cut it right here, for example. That should be plenty of time. And we're going to create an adjustment layer by holding Option, Command, and Y, and we're going to add a fast box blur effect to this. You can use Gaussian blur as well. Fast box blur is just a bit quicker. I'm going to set the iterations to 6 for a little bit more of a crispier blur, and then I'm going to set the blur radius to 6 as well. So now it's pretty blurry. And I'm going to add a levels effect to this, and I'm going to change it from RGB to alpha. And then by using these sliders, we can kind of crush everything together, and that is what is going to drive, or these two effects together is driving the morph. And you can kind of see it already here, how it's kind of bleeding into one another, getting that morph look. Now there is one thing you want to keep in mind, is you don't want these to be right on top of each other, because then it gets a little bit too crunchy. So just leave a little bit of a gap so you have just a little bit of softness here. All we're going to do from here on out is keyframe a few things. The first thing is going to be the blur radius. So I'm going to keyframe the blur radius, and I'm going to hit U on my adjustment layer to bring that up. And I'm just going to move the keyframe forward a little bit, and then I'm going to set it to 0. Like that, and then go forward a little bit more after this middle keyframe and set it to 0 again. So it goes from 0 to 6 to 0, and that's just going to give us that morph transition. And we want to make sure that we have an overlap between our shapes that or our text layers that we want to morph together. So let's take our text, which is what we're starting with, and we're going to hit T to bring up the opacity, keyframe the opacity, and go to the last keyframe and set all of that to 0. And then we're going to do the opposite for the text. So it's going to end at 100% and then start at 0. So you kind of get this fade of it kind of morphing together, and you can see that right there where we get some super nice looking morphs. And let me just increase the preview quality a little bit. And now if we go to the middle of the morph, you can see we get a little bit of this ghosting look, and you can adjust that further in here with how punchy you want it to be, how thick you want it to be. The more to the left you go, the thicker it's going to be. The more to the right you go, the thinner it's going to be. So play around with that until you get something that you feel looks pretty good. But that is pretty much the base of the morph animation. You can even add some turbulent displays to this if you want to add a little bit more movement to the transition as well. So you'll just add that on top and change the amount and all that good stuff to something you think looks pretty good. I don't want it to be too big. I just want it to be somewhat subtle, and you just want to keyframe the amount so that at the middle it's at the highest, and then at the beginning it's at 0, and you can copy that keyframe, paste that keyframe so that you just get a little bit of that movement, adds just a little bit more to it. And you can even animate the evolution as well by alt clicking and then typing in a simple expression like time times 10, 150, whatever, and it's just going to give it just a little bit of animation in there as well. But a super simple technique that you can use for pretty much anything. Now, if you want to use this in a composition with something else, you want to pre-comp your layers that you are morphing, otherwise it'll affect everything underneath it. So just pre-comp and make sure that you move all attributes into the new composition, and then you can work on so that not everything will be affected by the blur and the levels that we added to the adjustment layer. Now, the second text animation we're going to be doing is a bit of a perspective text, and there's a couple of different ways you can finagle it, but it's using a super sick effect that I wouldn't know if it wasn't for JK Motion doing his whole every effect, but it's the CC power pin. Now, before we get into how to actually use this, I want to talk a little bit about today's video sponsor, Artlist. I use Artlist for everything that I create, and I think that says everything you need to know about how good it actually is. They are an all-in-one platform, so they don't only have music or sound effects, which is something I use a lot, but they also have templates, plugins, and now they even have the new AI voiceover feature, which is super sick. I love having everything in one place so I don't have to keep track of 5 different subscriptions or get to know how 3 different algorithms work on different platforms to find exactly what I need. The new AI voiceover feature in particular has been super fun to work with, and I often create some pretty sexy animations that could really benefit from a nice voiceover. Unfortunately for me, I don't exactly have the best voice for that type of stuff, so I love that they have created this tool. It's also super easy to use. You select a voice, type in your script, click generate, and you're ready to download it and add it to your project. It's that simple. And all the voices are made by real people, and they are exclusive to Artlist, so it'll be the only place that you can find those exact voices. If you already have the Artlist Max subscription, you already have access to the feature. If you don't, you can use the link in the description to get 2 free months when you sign up for the annual subscription, or you can even go ahead and just get the standalone feature, which is a lot cheaper, but you obviously don't get access to the music or sound effects or any of the other cool stuff that they have on there. But with that being said, we can hop straight back into the tutorial and get going with this CC power pin. Now, there's a few different ways you can utilize this. You can either make an animation and then add it to that, or you can just create some text and then put it into perspective. Now, the first or the last and easiest way is simply to create a bit of text, like let's say we put goodbye here, and let's pick a little bit of a cooler font for this. I think something like a Dharma Gothic would actually work super well because it is so long that it's going to look really good once we put it into perspective as well. And we don't need that extra eye. But we can scale this up, and I'm just going to center this up, and then I'm going to add the CC power pin effect to this. And you can see it gives you this little orange line out here. It might be a different color for you, but essentially what it lets you do is move these things around, and these power pins, I suppose you can call them, and it lets you put all the text into perspective so you can get some really cool looking distorted scenes. You can put it up in the corner, and this is all cool and dandy, but to spice it up a little bit, we can create a pre-comp with some text animations and then add it to that. We create a new text layer, and we're just gonna put goodbye again, and then I'm gonna duplicate it and put a layer below and say, I don't know, it doesn't matter. And we can even pick a different text, like let's do obviously, and let's do a pretty wide font here, something like that maybe. We'll scale this down a good bit and maybe decrease the width of this a little bit so that it's a little bit closer to the size of this. We can even scale this up a little bit too to fit the width of both of these texts. And let's just take them and center them up for one another like that. And let's move this a little bit closer. Now I'm gonna bring up my guide by hitting Option and apostrophe, and I'm just going to center these up in the middle of my composition to make it a little bit easier on us for this next step that we are going to be doing. So I think something like that looks pretty good, and I'm just going to remove these guides, and what I'm going to do here is select both my text layers. I'm going to hit S, and I'm going to remove the link for the scales, and then for the goodbye text, I'm actually going to move the anchor point to the top of the layer, so whenever I scale it, it'll go from the top like this. And then all we're going to do here is at the very beginning keyframe both of the scales. I'm going to go forward to, let's say, 2 seconds, and we're going to scale the first one down a good bit, and the second one, let's move that up, stretch that up really nice and good. Boom, and then go forward a little bit, and we can take it down a little bit, but not all the way, just so we get kind of some counterplay. And I'm trying to keep the distance between them the same throughout, so it's just going to look a little bit better. So maybe this one, for example, we just want to increase this a little bit so that we keep roughly this amount of distance between them, and you just got to eyeball it a little bit. You know, it doesn't have to be perfect, but we try to get as close as we can to it. And then last but not least, let's put it all the way down. Boom, almost smash it. And at the very end, we are just going to copy our keyframes so that it will be a loop. Go 1 frame back, hit N, and we can even add some easing to this. Just do some sexy speed. Maybe take these and move them a little bit closer to this so that our animation isn't super long. Just like that, we have a pretty simple little animation that squishes it around, and it looks pretty cool. So we can take these, and I'm just gonna pre-comp this, and let's just name it text squish pre. And I'm gonna go into this by double clicking it, and I'm gonna select my little crop region tool down here, and I'm just gonna click and drag, and all I wanna do is close this off so that it's only our text that we need. And the good thing about the animation that we did is it's super simple because it never goes beyond this point here, and it never goes below this point here. So we don't have to worry too much about something being out of our interest area, focus area. But go into composition and go to crop comp to region of interest. Now we can go back into our main composition here, and we can add the CC power pin again, just like that. And this time you can see it's in the constraints of this box. Now we can go even further with this, and let's drag this text up a little bit, put that up there, and we'll duplicate this and put a copy of it below. For the sake of this, you should probably make sure you get this right off the bat, but we can just increase the height of it just a little bit to fit. Boom. So now we have these 2 layers here. We have CC power pin added to both of them. Now, what I'm going to do is, at the very beginning, I'm going to keyframe all of these power pin parameters here, and now we can start having some real good fun. So go forward a little bit to 112, something like that, and then you want to play around with the location of these power pins. So you want to move this one up, and then you want to do the opposite with this one. So we moved the bottom left, so we want to move the top left here on this one, so that it then goes up and meets that up there. So, and you want to make sure spacing stays pretty much the same. That's just going to give you the best result that you can possibly get out of this. But now you not only have the text moving and stretching, but you even have the corners of them as well. So it's just another level of distortion that you're adding to this. And you just want to play around with this. You can get pretty crazy with some of these results and the way that you are stretching these out. You can move it whichever way you want, get some really crazy perspective, like something like this. I mean, that looks wicked. You can add some more text down here and create some really interesting compositions. And it's really as simple as just having fun with it. But I think it's such an underrated tool. It's one that I don't use a whole bunch, but I think it's so sick, and I really need to start using it because you can create some very interesting compositions, especially for high impact action scenes, esports packages and stuff like that. Something like this would work really well. The third animation we're going to be doing today is a bit of a variation of one I did in the previous simple text animations, where we had this faux 3D style, and it kind of plays on that but just adds a bit of a different technique once we get to a certain point, and I just think it's a fun one to play around with. But we're going to start by typing out our text, and we'll just keep it super simple. I'm just going to do 1 letter actually, so I'm just going to do let's do a C instead, And let's center that up right in the middle, and I'll pick a Helvetica font for this because I like Helvetica. We're gonna start with that layer here, and then it's pretty much the same process of adding all the layers, the Minimax and the transform effects to get that extrusion. So we're gonna do that real quick. Again, you can use something like Mr. Horse, which will do it for you in an instant, but I like setting it up for this one myself just so we can keep it as minimal as possible. So we're gonna add a fill effect, which is going to be controlling the color of our text here. We'll just leave it red for now. We'll change that in the end. Then we are going to do a transform, and we're just going to rename this rotation. We're going to add a Minimax effect to this, and we're going to change that to just horizontal, and color we'll do alpha and color. And then if we increase the radius, we'll get some nice movement there. Then a transform effect for the position, and then another transform effect, which is going to be our counter rotation. Now we're going to open up all of these down here. We can start with the rotations because that's going to be super simple. Let's set the first rotation to, I don't know, whatever, 42, and then we can take our rotation in the counter rotation, and we'll just link that to the rotation up here, and we can open up the expressions for this, and we're just going to type in a minus sign at the beginning, so it kind of counter rotates. So when one rotates in a positive direction, the other one goes in a negative direction, and vice versa. That's just going to give us the correct rotation that we are sort of looking for. For the position down in our transform effect, we are going to alt click the stopwatch for it to add an expression, and we're going to start with a left bracket. Super simple. We're going to link the first parameter of the position, then we're going to set a comma, then we're going to link the second parameter of the position, and then we are going to add a plus, and then we're going to link the radius of the Minimax, and we're going to end it with a close bracket. That just means that whenever we extend the radius of the Minimax, it's then going to extend correctly. Now we do need to change it to just a vertical for it to extend properly. You just want to make sure you do that, otherwise you're not going to get the right look that you are going for. Anyways, now we've got that all set up. I am gonna duplicate this layer. Then we can remove the fill from this, and we can set the radius to 0 so that it's just this simple text layer at the very top. All we're gonna do here is take the text, the source text of both of them, and link them together. So I'll take this and I'll just parent that to the top layer so that whenever we change this to, let's say, a G, everything changes with it. The thought here is to, instead of it looking like it's extruding down, I want it to look like it's extruding from the bottom plane. And I'm just going to take my rotation of our little extrusion here, and I'm just going to move it up, and then with our letter G, I'm just going to take that up here and link it up at the top. And just by moving it alone, you can already see we kind of get the illusion that it's going up instead of kind of going down, if that makes sense. And let's go back out, and I'm going to keyframe the position of our text here, and then I'm going to take the Minimax here and keyframe that, and then if I hit U, I'm going to bring out my keyframes, and then at the very beginning, I'm just going to set my Minimax to 0 so it goes back down here to the middle, which is exactly what we want. And then I'm just going to line the text up right in the middle, and then we have some text that looks like it's extruding out instead of it going backwards the other way, which is what it would look like if we added a CC composite to this. So it kind of tricks the mind that instead of the text or like the extrusion moving backwards, we now just have our text which is coming up and out at the top. Now I don't know if you've seen this super cool refracted gloss effect, but I think it looks awesome, and I really want to start using it more in some animations. I do it sometimes in like Photoshop, but rarely in animations. I'm going to start out with a background just to make it nice and easy for us. I'm just going to make it like an off gray, dark gray type of thing, and let's add some text. Let's do refracted. That might look pretty cool. Scale that down a good bit. Now the setup is actually pretty simple. We are going to take our shape layer and we're going to change the solid fill to a gradient fill, and we want to make sure it goes from black to white. And then down in the middle, I'm just going to type or draw a little rectangle here, and you can make it whatever size you want. Most of the times what I end up doing is using a little bit of Adobe built-in math. So what I do is if I unlink that, I'll just make it the size of the composition. So 1920 by 1080. I'll just divide this by something like 10 so that I know that it's even, it can be evenly split across. And then you can move this to the very right or the very left, doesn't really matter. You can even keep it in the middle, but it's just easier this way. We're gonna add a repeater effect to this, And then we are just gonna add a good few copies, 14 maybe. And then we are just gonna move it out to the left. And this is what I'm saying is, if I went far enough, you can see it would fit perfectly if we had 10 copies, because I divided it by 10. But you want to play around with this until you get the look that you kind of want, and you can always decrease the size of this and make them smaller or bigger, and then change the gradient of it as well. Something like that I think looks pretty good. And that is the main setup for our displacement map that we are going to be using to derive this effect. We can disable that, and we're just going to add an adjustment layer below our shape layer, and we are going to add a displacement map. And we are going to make sure we select our shape layer and effects and mask just so it's there, and I'll set both of these to 0, and I'll change it to luminance, both of them. And now if we increase the values of this, you can see we'll start to get some pretty crazy distortion here, but just a little bit of that distortion is pretty good. And you might get some bending around here, so you can enable wrap pixels around, and that should help it with the background and not being torn up. Now this looks maybe just a bit boring by itself, so we want to spice it up a little bit more. So we're going to add another adjustment layer, and we are going to add something like a camera lens blur. And we are going to again select our shape layer, go to effects and masks, and you can see it just adds that little bit of blur in the whites. And you can of course invert it, but you can increase this a little bit just to get the exact look that you want, and I think it looks pretty cool like that. We can even take our shape layer here and duplicate it. So if I show that up, now we get this little kind of like a curtain type of thing, but we are going to add some grain to it. You can just add a noise effect. We don't need it to be animated. You can if you want to. And I'm going to remove the noise, or like the color of the noise, and just add a lot of grain to it. And then you can play around with the blending modes. That's just gonna give you just a little bit more texture in there. So something like that looks pretty good. Maybe decrease the opacity of it just a little bit so we get that nice texture in there. Maybe move it over just a little bit. Boom. So it kind of connects at the edge there. You can even use this as a display or like a track mat for still textures as well. So you can take any of these. Let's do a photocopy one. Like this might be pretty good. Drag that into your composition. You can just have it at the top, place it wherever you want to, and then we just want to use our shape layer that also drives our displacement map as a track mat, and just change it to a luma mat instead, so it's only reading the black and white values and then applying as needed from there. And you can even spice it up a little bit more, add some background elements that will just accentuate the look of the refracted gloss here. So putting a shape in the background, we'll start with a black and then we'll go into like a reddish color maybe here, but decrease the opacity of it a good bit, and the same with the black color here, something like that, and you just get that nice texture in there. But I just think it's a super cool look, and it's just such an easy effect to use. The displacement maps with the shapes are super cool. You can animate it as well, and we're actually going to be using that for our next animation, which is, I saw this text animation in the Super Bowl commercial, or like the Apple Music halftime show, I should say. And it's kind of this distorted, wavy, chromatic aberration text animation, and I've wanted to do it ever since. And it wasn't until I was playing around with the gloss thing that I figured that's probably how they made that as well. So it's actually using pretty much the same technique. So let's type in our little text here. We're just going to start with music, and I actually want this to be all caps. Boom, place that in the middle, and let's just duplicate this, make a little text layer above, and change the font to maybe integral. Boom, actually maybe just regular. We're gonna scale this down and increase the kerning of it just a little bit so it kind of spans out. I just want to make sure it's somewhat lined up here. Again, doesn't need to be perfect, but I want it to look somewhat good, because it's just gonna sell the effect better if you actually take time to do it pretty good. But now we have this. And I'm just going to take all of this, and I'm just going to pre-comp this and just name this warp text pre. So we have that in there, and then we are going to take our rectangle tool again, and we want to set the fill back to what we had it. So we want a black to white gradient, and we want to make sure the opacity is all the way up now that we just messed around with it. And we just want to create a line going straight down the middle. This time we'll do a horizontal line, and the gradient doesn't really matter which way you do it. Just make sure it's from top to bottom, like that. It doesn't even have to be perfectly straight either, just get it pretty close. Again, we are going to add a repeater effect to this, and this time we don't need too many copies, maybe something like 7 will work pretty good, but we're going to increase the distance for it a good bit so that you know, they aren't super close together. So I'm going to increase that a good bit to get some nice spacing in between them. And then we are going to add something like a wave warp to this, which is just going to give us a little bit of movement. And let's increase the width a good bit. And then we can add something like a turbulent displace to this as well. And we just want this to be a little bit funky. Not too funky, but pretty funky. And we'll alt-click the evolution, and then we will type out a simple expression times, let's say 50, which will just give us a little bit more movement as well. And we're gonna add a fast box blur to this, and I'll set that to something like 6 and increase that a good bit so that we get some nice smooth transitions between the blacks and whites and all that good stuff, no hard edges. Now we need to animate the position of this, and I'm just gonna start at the very top here and hit P to bring up my position, keyframe that, go forward to 5 seconds should be pretty good. And we just want to drag this down a good bit so we get some of these, to get the different copies of our animation here into the text, which is going to give us that transition that we need. And then you can even take this and you can even duplicate it, and you can offset them just a little bit if you need to, just by removing that keyframe there, and maybe have one that goes like super quick, like something like that. Dragged it up a little bit and move that to be in between these two. And that's just going to give a little bit more variation in this, so it's not too similar with all of them. Just gives it, just varies the look a little bit. We can take this and pre-compose this, and we'll just name this displacement pre. The way we're going to get the displacement in there is actually with an effect called CC Gloss. What I'm going to do is, above the text layer, I'm going to add an adjustment layer, and I'm going to add the CC Gloss effect. And it works sort of similar to the displacement map, but just kind of different in the way that it looks. And I found that this looks a bit better for this specific effect, but we're going to change it to effects and mask, and want to make sure we have the right layer selected, of course. So now we just get a little bit of distortion there. You can play around with the displacement of it all and all that good stuff. So you can see you get some of that nice ripply looking, which is exactly what we're going for. Now, this looks a bit boring just by itself. What we can do is duplicate this a couple times, so we'll need 3 copies in total. And I just like stacking this just because it gives it just a little bit more of a different look. You see you get just a slight difference in each of them. And we're going to add a channel mixer, that is. We can copy this to the 2 other layers. And then let's say the first one, we'll just keep the blue channel. For the second one, we'll just keep the green channel. And for the last one, we will just keep the red channel. And then we can change the blending mode of this to add. And now we'll get white on top, but we'll get just that little bit of displacement in there, so we get that nice chromatic aberration, which is going to be accentuated every time the ripple comes through, so it gives us that kind of wavy, distorted look whenever the ripples come through. Of course, you can go crazier with this, and instead of just using the repeat effect, making your own kind of distortion, which is going to give you a lot more control, but this one is a lot simpler to use. One thing I like adding to this is just a little bit of detail. I mean, look at how sick that looks. I like adding an adjustment layer and adding a camera lens blur, place it below the displacement layer, and change it to, of course, be the displacement layer that we're going to use for the source of this. And make sure you enable effects and mask, and just increase that a little bit. And then you just get a little bit of that blur where it's going to come in, and it just makes it a little bit, you know, just a little bit juicier. And I really love the way that it looks, mixes it together just a little bit and creates a pretty nice textured feel all throughout and adds to the oomph of it. But that is pretty much it for this tutorial. 5 different text animations. Also, thank you to Artlist again for sponsoring this video. Try out the AI voiceover feature, it is insanely sick. Make sure to use the link in the description if you sign up, so you can get 2 free months when you pick the annual subscription. If you are interested in the project file, you can get that on patreon.com/Mapal as well. And with that being said, I just want to say thank you, and I'll see you again very soon. Peace out.